And guess what this Monday is? It is a big day for tax reform, as you know.
I thought maybe it was your birthday or something.
No, that was so last month. Yeah, the House is set to vote tonight on the motion to go to conference with the Senate on the GOP tax bill. Good Monday morning to you. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Melissa Francis. Both the upper and lower chambers must hash out their differences in the conference committee before a final unified bill heads to the president's desk. This comes after the Senate narrowly passed its version early Saturday morning. The head of the Republican Policy Committee says he knows both chambers can work out their differences.
Absolutely, there are some changes that still need to be made in conference to work these things out. The other thing that you haven't mentioned, the big differences are the Republican bill in the Senate eliminates the mandate of Obamacare. It takes Obamacare from being a mandatory program to a voluntary program. And yes, I like the idea of making taking away the death tax entirely.
Peter Doocy is live on Capitol Hill with more. I imagine it's very busy there today, Peter.
It's picking up, Melissa, and 10 days from right now, a final tax bill could be on President Trump's desk, the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. That's according to Republican Georgia Senator David Perdue. The next big step in the next couple hours is going to be when all House lawmakers come back around 6 o'clock tonight to vote on that motion to go to a conference where the Senate bill and the House bill, which are different for now, can be streamlined into one package that everybody agrees on.
The House was not supposed to be in session today. We were coming in tomorrow, but I called us back because we wanted to act decisively and get this done. So we will have a motion to go to conference today, vote on that tonight, and then we will name our conferees. The Senate will do the same this week, and we will get to work on the differences. There's not a lot of differences, but there are some, and we'll come to a common ground and get it done.
But as Republicans look ahead, Senate Democrats are still steamed at the way Republicans muscled their tax bill through at 2 a.m. on Saturday with handwritten edits scribbled into the margins of the 479-page bill that were being Xeroxed and then sent around for review. Every Democrat ultimately voted no, and for some, that was a tough no to cast.
Friday was my single worst day as a U.S. Senator because as somebody who wanted to be part of tax reform, who realizes we need to have a more competitive corporate rate, that realizes we need to bring back some of those American profits. This was Swamp 101.
There is no strict deadline for Republicans here to finish rewriting the entire tax code, but there is a clock ticking for them to come up with enough cash to keep the government funded. It is on Friday. If they do not have a spending bill for funding the government by the end of this week, there will be a shutdown. However, that is something the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says is not going to happen. Melissa.
Wow, a lot to do there. I'm glad they were up all night working, though. That makes me feel good. Peter Doocy, thank you.
And they can't just charge government operations to a credit card.
There you go. No.
Meantime, President Trump reacting this morning to the passage of the Senate GOP tax bill before departing for Salt Lake City, Utah, to announce controversial plans for 2 national monuments.
Stock market, I think, is going to have a very big day based on the massive tax cuts that we're very much in the process of getting approved. But based on the vote we had last week, the stock market has been reacting unbelievably well.
And he's right about that. The stock market hit new highs just this morning. Kevin Corke reporting live from the White House. Kevin.
Hey there, John. You're right. The president on his way to Utah to shrink a pair of national monuments, including one whose land set aside, believe it or not, is actually larger than the entire state of Delaware. But there is also great excitement here at the White House and for the president in particular. Thanks to what has happened on Capitol Hill. You heard Peter Doocy talking about that, this prospect of paving the way for historic tax reform. In fact, the president took to Twitter this morning to talk about that. He said, hey, with the great vote on cutting taxes, this could be a big day for the stock market. And you, especially if you have a 401k or you participate in some larger plan. So at this hour, let's take a look at the big board, see how the markets are doing. As you see, the Dow Industrial Average up over 230 points. Get this, it's actually advanced, John, some 6,000 points since Election Day, up about a third or 33%. Dow on pace once again for a 64th record close under the president and 81st record close since Election Day. The administration quietly confident now, getting back to taxes, that even as the negotiations take part on Capitol Hill, there is a very strong likelihood the president will be able to sign some version of tax cuts into law this year.
We've had historic tax relief passed through both the House and the Senate. In reality, where the Senate moved was to, in many ways, the amendments they made at the end made their bill much more similar to the House. So there's a few issues that need to be reconciled, but we really believe this should flow fluidly. We believe that probably it'll be a bill on the president's desk the week of December 18th.
So you heard the date there, December 18th. Now, there have been some who have suggested that what will probably happen is the House will take sort of a broad look at the Senate offering, and maybe with a couple of tweaks, they'll just use that to advance the agenda on tax cuts. However, the White House is, in fact, pushing back against that notion. They say they do expect it to go to committee. We'll have to see how this all pans out. Now, as you also know, the president is on his way to Utah. While he is there, he'll talk not just about the 2 national monuments. He'll talk about a host of other issues. Joining him on the trip, Mike Lee and Orrin Hatch, 2 senators from the great state of Utah. As a Westerner, we can appreciate this, John. Of course, that's at 2:40 today. I'll have the details for you, but for now, back to you.
Kevin and I both love the West. Thank you. Kevin Corke there at the White House. Thank you.
President Trump starting a feud with the FBI after firing off a series of tweets this weekend. It comes after reports stating that an FBI agent was removed from special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation because of anti-Trump text messages that he may have sent. The president earlier yesterday tweeted, quote, "After years of Comey with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation and more running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters, worst in history. But fear not, we will bring it back to greatness." Former FBI Director James Comey has since fired back at the president. Former Attorney General Eric Holder also weighing in, tweeting he's, quote, "not letting this go." No kidding. Here now is Michael Warren. He is senior writer at the Weekly Standard. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of this story?
Well, I don't think the FBI is immune or above criticism. They've made a lot of mistakes, a lot of things that I think people around President Trump have rightly criticized them for. But I do wonder how prudent it is for the president himself to go so hard against the FBI when there are a number of people around him in his administration, people who are in the transition, people who are in the campaign for president, who are being investigated by the FBI right now. And in fact, the FBI have now got 2 indictments and 2 guilty pleas.
So wait, what's the logical extension of what you're saying there? That if he goes at them harder, they're going to be even meaner to the people who are under investigation? I mean, why would it not be? They're either going to do their job or they're not.
Right, but I do think that it could be a political problem as well as look, the FBI is not going to go easy on the president or anybody else if perhaps if they think that they're being unfairly targeted. But yeah. I don't think that underscores, or I think that underscores the fact that the FBI has, and the Mueller investigation more broadly, has a need to look like they're above politics.
See, so they do. And what does it tell you that there was someone involved in the investigation? It wasn't just, someone. It was a person who was high up and who was working on the Hillary Clinton investigation and helped draft the exoneration, before they even went and met with her, and helped to develop the nuance of what was her intention. So for this person to not only have the political beliefs that, he hated the potential President Trump before he was elected, not only have those, but to also share them with someone else in writing when you're with the FBI and ostensibly that everything can be investigated forever, doesn't that show kind of poor judgment on his part? And this person's supposed to be about judgment.
Right. No, I mean, we're talking about prudence. That's not very prudent to do that either.
Yeah.
Look, I would be very interested to know exactly what those texts say. You hope that the FBI is going to be professional, but they're human just like everybody else. And I think it was a good idea for Mueller to remove this agent from the investigation. But because, again, it is so important for this investigation, for its findings to be taken credibly on both sides of the aisle, for it to look like it's above. And I think it's got a high standard here that this particular agent obviously wasn't helping them reach.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, you bring up a great point. We would like to see all of the text because it could be you know, boy, he's a jerk, he's spouting off his mouth again, which, you know, would be a little more innocuous than what a lot of people might say to each other. Or it could be, wouldn't he be the most frightening president of all time? We can't let that happen. You know, I mean, it's like there's a big difference between what these anti-Trump texts might say. What do you think are the odds that we get to see him?
Well, I don't know, to be honest. I don't know if that's, I suppose in the IG's report, because this is a part of an Inspector General's report, that we may end up seeing them. But again, I think this goes back to the point that I made at the beginning, which is that it's not very prudent for the President of the United States, I think, to sort of cast aspersions on the FBI. He can have complaints all he wants, but during an open investigation right now, it's probably best. I mean, his lawyers are probably telling him, don't tweet this stuff out. I don't think that stopped the president before.
Okay, here's what Michael McCall had to say about all this with Maria Bartiromo. I'll get your reaction.
Well, I think the more disturbing report I heard come out was that one of the FBI agents assigned to the Mueller investigation was reassigned because of his political views. I worked in the Justice Department for many years. FBI agents should not bring in their own political bias into these investigations. And the fact that this was one of the lead agents on the Hillary Clinton email investigation, if true, I think it's very disturbing and possibly could call for a reopening of that investigation.
Just your reaction to the last part. Is it worth reopening, or do we have so many investigations going on right now we can't even keep track of them?
I mean, if it's worth reopening the Clinton investigation, I don't know. I mean, perhaps these texts were the absolute worst they could possibly be, but I don't know if these texts from one of the lead agents is enough to prompt that. And the fact of the matter is that Hillary Clinton isn't president. She's not in public life anymore. And whatever you could say, I think you can certainly criticize the FBI's decision, Director Comey's decision to do what he did back in the summer of 2016. But a lot of that really has been wrapped up. I don't see a reason here to reopen it, but maybe the IG report will change my mind.
All right, just a typical Monday. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Melissa.
Well, former Access Hollywood host Billy Bush is making headlines over the leaked tape that surfaced weeks before the 2016 election. We'll tell you what he's saying about then-candidate Trump's crude comments heard on that tape. Plus, fallout from an erroneous report by ABC News investigative reporter Brian Ross, tweeted and shared tens of thousands of times. Why did the network wait hours before deleting the post and retracting his report?
That report still existed when you had the media press party here, ironically, on Friday. If he worked for me, I wouldn't say 4 weeks suspension without pay is enough, because this is the heart of the entire year.
Right now, former Access Hollywood host Billy Bush is speaking out about the leaked tape on which then-candidate Donald Trump was heard making vulgar comments about women weeks before the 2016 election. Bush is pushing back after reports that Trump is questioning the authenticity of the tape. Here's what Billy Bush wrote in the Sunday New York Times. Of course he said it, and we laughed along without a single doubt that this was hypothetical hot air from America's highest-rated bloviator. Surely we thought none of this was real. We now know better. Let's bring in our media panel. Joe Concha, media reporter for The Hill, and Judith Miller, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter. She is also an author and Fox News contributor. So is this, Judy, just an attempt by Billy Bush to try to get his job back?
Well, I think that's partly what's going on here. Clearly, John, Bush is just furious about the fact that the president is still the president and he's not on the air any longer. And even though I was touched by the honesty of certain parts of his column, the notion that he was just chuckling along and didn't take Donald Trump's remarks seriously at the time reflects such a lack of understanding of what's going on. And I say this not just in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein allegations, the sexual harassment charges everywhere. I say it in terms of what you heard on that tape. On the other hand, his willingness to come forth now and say, okay, yes, I was wrong, and he acknowledges that, but the president did say that is important, and I think I understand why the New York Times gave him that platform, even though it is somewhat an exercise in self-reclamation.
Yeah, he has taken some of the blame, I guess, for his own behavior there,
Yes.
Joe. But when you hear, him sort of chortling along with the now president's words, I don't know, it gives a different take to it, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, John. I mean, I agree with Judy completely. This is about Billy Bush wanting to work again. It's been over a year since he was fired. Remember, he was on the Today Show. That's a nice little perch to be. Now he's going to go on Colbert tonight, and he'll say all the politically correct things that they'll get the SEALs in the audience clapping along, and hopefully this will put a good face on it for him where he can work again, because he never should have been fired, I don't think. I mean, think about it. If every private conversation off air were recorded in this business, only John Scott would have a job at this point. Maybe.
It pays to be the most boring man in television. All right, I want to turn your attention to another big media event over the weekend. It really started a little bit later than this on Friday, when Brian Ross tweeted out something that seemed to tie ex-General Michael Flynn to the president, and suggested that Flynn was going to testify that President Trump had told him to get in touch with the Russians during the transition of the campaign. That turned out to be wrong. Here's what Kellyanne Conway had to say about it.
Every network, the cable stations, the mainstream media has obsessed. The Democrats on Capitol Hill, they've done nothing this year. The only accomplishment the Democrats have this year is holding up as saying stop, resist, obstruct, no, and Russia, Russia, Russia. It goes to the essence of why 14% of Americans have a favorable impression in the media. And Brian Ross was not pushed back by the anchor either. There's one male anchor left on Network Morning TV, and I was disappointed because he's a responsible journalist. He should have pushed back.
That report sent the market, Judy, tumbling something like 350 points.
True. Investigative reporting is a very high-stakes game, especially when you're doing so on the President of the United States. And so the standard should have been very high.
We're losing your mic. The battery must be dying or something. That's what that thundering sound is that our viewers might hear right now. Go ahead, Joe. Give us your take.
There's a great poll out today that from YouGov. 60% of those who support President Trump say the media, not just untrustworthy, not just dishonest, but actually are the enemy of the people. And then you have this poll from last month that says 46% of voters overall say that, and this is a Political Morning Consult poll, believe the media fabricates stories about this administration. Why do they think that? Probably because of this total and utter reliance almost on unnamed sources. And you look back to Watergate and you say, well, that was based on obviously a big unnamed source in Deep Throat. But Woodward and Bernstein were sober and they were careful and they took their time. In other words, the exact opposite of what Brian Ross did on Friday by rushing this report. And by the way, ABC, I know they suspended Brian Ross for 4 weeks. That's fine. But they offered at first what was called a clarification. Yeah. Not a correction. A clarification is when you're at a diner and you tell a waitress, hey, I'll have a coffee with some milk and give me some sweetener, and they come with Sweet and Low, and you say, oh no, let me clarify, I wanted Splenda. That's a clarification. This was a complete correction and retraction that needed to be done, because we were talking about Trump, the candidate, telling Flynn to talk to the Russians. That's huge. And Trump, after election, telling his national security advisor to talk to the Russians about fighting Syria, ISIS in Syria, that is a complete difference. That's not a clarification. So there needs to be more questions answered at ABC as to why they kept that story up so long and why they offered only a clarification.
It did take more than a day to retract. All right, Joe Concha, Judy Miller, thank you both.
Thank you.
The search for the missing North Carolina toddler comes to an end. Investigators believe they have found the remains of 3-year-old Mariah Woods miles away from her home. We're live with the breaking developments. Right now, the former NFL quarterback who lost his job pioneering the kneeling protest during the national anthem is honored by the Civil Liberties Union. Colin Kaepernick receiving the 2017 Courageous Advocate Award at a ceremony in Los Angeles last night.
We must confront systemic oppression as a doctor would a disease. You identify it, you call it out, you treat it, and you defeat it.
In the meantime, the NFL ratings are down, and the league is seriously concerned about the dwindling attendance. Jonathan Hunt is live with reaction. Jonathan.
Melissa, the former 49ers quarterback, now unemployed, of course, wasn't on the publicized list of honorees at this ACLU event, and a surprised audience gave him a standing ovation as he stood up for his decision to kneel.
People wanting to keep more of their hard-earned money, and that's what you see in the bills that passed both the House and the Senate.
No matter the risk, and regardless of reward, to stand up for our fellow men and women who are being oppressed with the understanding that human rights cannot be compromised.
But while he is getting awards, Kaepernick isn't getting a contract, and he's filed a grievance with the NFL accusing owners of colluding against him. President Trump, meantime, continues to tell fans to stay away from games as long as players kneel during the national anthem, and it may be having some effect. Last season, just under 18 million fans attended games. This season, through 13 weeks, without figures for tonight's game, of course, just under 13 million have attended. So the weekly average last season was just over 1 million. This season just under 1 million, down just about 49,000 per week. That's about 3,000 per stadium if you average it across 16 games. Now, Melissa, that's not a number that will make a significant dent in owners' profits. What might be more worrying are TV ratings, which are down significantly this year, although it's impossible to say whether that's because of the kneeling issue or just because there are a lot of bad teams out there. Although as a daughter of Los Angeles, Melissa, I'm sure you're happy to acknowledge that neither the Rams or Chargers are currently in that group of terrible NFL teams.
I'm a 49ers fan, actually. Actually, now we're Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is really painful. That's where my husband is from, so it is really painful. Thank you for reminding me of that, though. All right, we'll see you later.
Sure,
Thank you.
You're welcome. And let's not talk about my Broncos, okay?
Well, there's always next year. Always next year. So.
A blockbuster deal in the works. Pharmacy giant CVS has agreed to buy Aetna, the insurance company. How this landmark deal could reshape the future of the health industry ahead. Plus, it's a whirlwind week on Capitol Hill as Republicans race against the clock to get their tax bill on the president's desk by year's end. Will they beat the deadline? We'll discuss it next.
People wanting to keep more of their hard-earned money, and that's what you see in the bills that passed both the House and the Senate.
A blockbuster deal is in the works with drugstore giant CVS agreeing to buy health insurer Aetna, one of the biggest health insurers in the U.S. for a whopping $69 billion. Let's turn to FBN's Deirdre Bolton with more on what this landmark deal could mean for the future of the health industry.
This is huge, Melissa. It certainly is. It is the biggest deal announced this year so far. So just getting it in under the wire before this calendar year closes. But the idea here is to create as close to one-stop shopping as possible for consumers. So if you take prescription medication, this new company post-merger will include a health insurer, a retail pharmacy, and a company that can negotiate prescription drug prices with drug makers. That is a huge point. So CVS is going to own almost every step of this prescription process, only with one exception, and that is obviously it is not a drug maker. It is not actually fabricating drugs. But many analysts see this as sort of a preemptive strike against Amazon, a company known to step into new businesses and crush the competition. Recently, Amazon applied for and was approved for wholesale pharmacy licenses in at least 12 states. So that means if Amazon decides to go down this path, you can order your prescription medicine and you have it delivered by Amazon, all the convenience there, along with your paper towels or crayons or books or whatever you normally order from Amazon. This threat is real, and it is causing these larger, older companies just to rethink their strategies. I mean, if you remember, Melissa, I know you do, when Amazon put in that bid and bought Whole Foods, right, it was $13.7 billion. Every other supermarket stock fell hard on the news. So the idea here is these older companies have to innovate in a world where Amazon exists. Back to you.
And this one is a layup. I mean, getting your prescriptions delivered with everything else. I mean, as somebody who uses Amazon for a pack of gum, like this makes perfect sense. So very interesting.
It certainly does. And CVS has something like 10,000 retail stores. So the more that they can keep people there, the more we go in, we get our prescriptions, but then maybe we buy gum. Exactly. And they need that retail business to thrive.
The battle is on.
That's right.
Thank you. See you later.
Sure.
It appears to be a tragic end to the search for a 3-year-old girl missing nearly a week. The FBI says agents believe the body of Mariah Woods has been found in a creek nearly 25 miles away from her home in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Just moments ago, the mother's boyfriend made his first appearance in court as he faces charges in connection with the child's disappearance. Laura Engel is live in our New York newsroom. What do we know, Laura, about the connection to the mother's boyfriend?
You know, this is such a tragic case indeed. 32-year-old Earl Kimmerer just made that first court appearance to face numerous charges in connection with the death of Mariah Woods, including concealing a death and obstruction of justice. But how she died and where she died, John, is still a mystery. While investigators wait for details of the autopsy being performed now, Kimmerer appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit. He was shackled and cuffed as a judge read the charges against him and held his bond at more than $1 million. Now, Kimmerer is no stranger to the justice system. We've been doing some digging around. Since 2005, he's been convicted of larceny numerous times. In 2012, he was convicted of assault as well as being drunk and disorderly. He was also charged today with second-degree burglary, felony larceny, and possession of stolen property. When Woods was first reported missing, taking you back to last weekend, Kimmerer told investigators that he last saw Mariah waking up around midnight Sunday and says he told her to go back to bed. Her mother says she went to check on her in the morning and she was gone. As the search for little Mariah went on for several days, her mother spoke out, pleading to the public for help to find her daughter. Now investigators are working to put together the timeline of events that led to this apparent tragic ending.
We must continue to protect investigative details. The focus of this investigation has changed from a missing child homicide case. No one involved in this search and no one in this community wants Mariah's death to go unpunished.
And the district attorney has said that he has consulted on the current charges against Kimmerer, and additional charges could be coming as the investigation continues. We learned today that Kimmerer will be back in court on December 18th. We'll bring you more as we get it here. John.
So sad. Laura Engel in our New York newsroom. Thank you.
Thanks.
President Trump throwing his support behind Roy Moore. The Republican nominee is facing decades-old sexual assault allegations from several women. A preview of what to expect in the race for the open Senate seat in Alabama next.
Now we see all of the accusations that have come out from brave women who are finally getting their voice to be able to stand up and speak out. And those are credible voices, and those voices are far more credible than the denials that Roy Moore has. And people need to take that into account.
We are just over a week away from the special election for the Alabama Senate seat vacated by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, and President Trump is throwing his support behind candidate Roy Moore. Despite sexual assault allegations against the Republican, Trump tweeting, quote, "Democrats' refusal to give even one vote for massive tax cuts is why we need Republican Roy Moore to win in Alabama. We need his vote on stopping crime, illegal immigration, border wall, military, pro-life, VA judges, Second Amendment, and more. No to Jones, a Pelosi-Schumer puppet." All right, so what's next for the controversial candidate? Let's bring in our political panel. Richard Fowler is a radio talk show host and a Fox News contributor. Lawrence Jones is a radio talk show host and contributor to The Blaze. Gentlemen, welcome. I want to start with President Trump on this first. And Lawrence, I'll ask you. Anytime he weighs in on this issue in particular, it seems some voters at least are reminded of the accusations that came out against President Trump. Is it politically wise for him to get involved?
Well, I think both political parties have decided that they're just going to support their candidates because it's politically expedient. But I think when you're talking about Donald Trump's perspective, he's always said that the allegations against him weren't true. So I put him in that position with Judge Moore when you have Judge Moore saying they weren't true. Although right now I'm not sure I believe Judge Moore. I believe that due process should happen. But I think the president is coming from the perspective of a victim, he thinks.
Richard, I wonder if it just has more to do with he's coming from a place of just having scrounged and scraped for every single vote to try and get tax reform through, and then all the challenges that came with every vote that he's tried to mount before this. And that's all he's thinking about is numbers. Can you sell that?
I mean, it is a numbers game for the president, and to be real with you, Melissa, I do think that Roy Moore is going to win this race despite these allegations, and that has everything to do with the fact that I think Alabama Republicans have continued to stand by him for the past couple months, and I think they'll continue to do so, and it might just take him over the edge when we get into December, and then it becomes a ball game for the United States Senate. Will Mitch McConnell seat Roy Moore with all these allegations against him? Will they send him to ethics, or will they say we have another vote for Republicans, so it doesn't matter? And And that is going to be the big question mark. But I do believe that next week we will have a Roy Moore senator, from Senator Moore from Alabama.
Lawrence, do you think he's going to win? Yeah, and what do you think happens?
Yeah, I think it's going to win, but this is not just a Republican issue. What has happened is both political parties has decided that they left morality to the back of the bus a long time ago. I mean, we let Bill Clinton stay in office for years.
Well,
we see what Al Franken.
I don't want to. Hang on. I don't want this to boil down to a place where we're arguing about who did what when or that sort of thing. It does seem like we are at a place where if you're working for a company and you're accused of this harassment, it's your boss's decision what happens to you. But with public figures, it's a little different in the sense that they were voted in by a group of people. So it's almost like if you stand up and you say, here, everybody throws everything they can at you, and whether you did it or not, if you're elected, you're elected.
Yeah, but Melissa, that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because it's politically expedient, and both political parties want to protect their party and the vote.
Well, I mean, let's just be very clear here. I think there's a difference. I mean, sadly for the women who have come out against Roy Moore, there is no due process because a lot of these cases have passed the statute of limitations. So the due process comes by the Alabama voters going to the polls and voting. And what it looks like is going to happen on the ground there is that Roy Moore has a chance of winning. And I think the president, by campaigning in Pensacola, which is about 25 miles from the border of Alabama, has been very clear that he's going to support Roy Moore. He's going to double down on it. And sadly, these women won't get their justice, and the voters are going to vote for Roy Moore.
The same for Nancy Pelosi supporting her party.
I mean, I think there's a big difference here betwing the two, and I think that's what Melissa's trying to point out.
I'm not sure there's a big difference in the sense that you can, any sort of candidate comes forward, and once you know what you know about them, it's then up to the voters. And if they decide they want this representative in spite of what he's supposed to have done and how credible the witnesses are or the victims, all that kind of thing, if they decide they want him anyway, who is anyone to tell them they can't have him?
Well, I think that's the point, Melissa, and I think to go further, the question becomes, is Mitch McConnell and members of the Republican caucus in the Senate has said that they won't seat him. So the question now becomes, after the Alabama voters vote for him, will this Senate seat him? And that's a Mitch McConnell question.
They don't have a right to unseat him.
Well,
the voters have a right to choose who they want.
Okay, Lawrence, how difficult, besides the right, I mean, it's very hard for them not to seat him. I mean, it's not just like we're going to decide yes or no. This is not something we've historically seen a lot of. Lawrence.
Right, exactly. It's a tough process, and not to mention you're going to tick off the voters that sent him there despite the allegations. Look, I'm not saying I agree with Roy Moore. I'm not saying I agree with any of these people that have been accused. But what I am saying that the American people have a right, the people of Alabama have a right to choose who they want to choose despite the allegations.
Yeah, I think we have to go, but I think what's similar is they're the employer in this case. The voters are the employer. So they get to decide the same way in the other case. It's the employer who decides, do I still want this person working at my office or not?
The one distinction here